They slammed her to the ground for filming, then shattered her phone to silence the truth. Tiana's arrest was brutal, public, and unjust. But the cops didn't realize one thing. The young black woman they just humiliated was the city councilwoman's daughter, and by the time they found out, it was already too late. Before we continue this powerful story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another powerful story you won't want to miss. The sun hung lazily in the sky, filtering soft afternoon light through a canopy of trees that bordered Riverside Park. It was one of those rare days when the city seemed to take a breath, when kids could be heard laughing from the swings, when birds trilled melodies across the walkways, and when no one rushed to be anywhere. It was in that warm stillness that Tiana Green stood at the corner of a winding sidewalk, phone in hand, camera recording. The screen flickered slightly as she laughed, tracking her best friend Marisol walking ahead, her curls bouncing and sundress dancing in the breeze. Tiana's smile was unguarded. She rarely got moments like this. Carefree, quiet, real. Her camera lens moved easily with the rhythm of Marisol's steps, occasionally dipping when she let out a chuckle or offered a playful comment from behind the screen. "Girl, work that strut?" she teased, giggling. Marisol turned, stuck out her tongue, then kept walking. They had been doing this for years, filming little life clips, like time capsules for their future self. Nothing planned, nothing serious, just memory. But this wasn't just leisure for Tiana. She saw filming as a kind of sacred practice. A calving life, the way her mother, Councilwoman Green, had taught her. Speak truth to power, her mother always said, and never let silence bury the truth. Tiana took that to heart. That phone in her hand, it wasn't just a camera, it was a witness, a weapon, a shield. She'd grown up watching her mother attend city council meetings and press conferences, sometimes coming home too exhausted to eat, but still making time to explain why justice mattered. Tiana had sat on the living room floor as a child, while her mother balanced stacks of documents, budget reports, and handwritten notes, all while braiding Tiana's hair. And in those braids were truths about struggle, pride, and the power of being seen. It was why she filmed, why she paid attention, why even now, on a lazy afternoon, her camera lens never strayed too far from reality. That's when she noticed them, two uniformed officers standing near the edge of the park's perimeter. They weren't interacting with anyone, not yet, just watching, hands on hips, radios at their belts, brows drawn tight like clouds before thunder. Tiana's breath caught for a moment, something about the posture, the presence, the stillness before motion. It was instinct more than fear, an alertness bred from no. She adjusted the camera angle subtly, tilting the lens until the officers came into frame. Marisol hadn't noticed them yet, still gliding toward the intersection like the whole day was hers. Tiana swallowed hard, her eyes flickering from the screen to the scene. A voice inside whispered, "Just keep filming." So she did. Her laughter was gone now, replaced by focus. The breeze continued, but Tiana, the air had grown still. The light around her changed. Something was coming. She could feel it. And she knew, even then, that her phone might become the only record of what happened next. Tiana shifted her stance, both hands now gripping the phone, elbows slightly bent to steady the frame. Her screen caught the moment one of the officers began to walk, deliberate, slow steps that signaled something more than routine patrol. Marisol, still unaware, had just reached the edge of the path where it curved near a row of hedges. She paused to check her phone, head tilted, humming a song Tiana couldn't hear. But Tiana heard everything else: the heavy bootsteps, the crackle of a radio, the tightening quiet from bystanders nearby. The sounds of a peaceful park were now filtered through a layer of tension. Even the laughter from the playground felt distant, swallowed by the sudden gravity, pulling everyone's attention toward the officers. One officer placed a hand on his utility belt. The other glanced toward Marisol, then toward Tiana. A slow breath escaped her lips. She remembered sitting with her mother during community hearings, where testimonies blurred into statistics. How often women of color were confronted, how often recordings vanished or were dismissed. Tiana had always thought, "Not me," If I'm there, it gets captured. If I see it, the world sees it. Her phone felt heavier now, not just a piece of tech but a tether to the truth. She stepped a bit closer, careful not to cross any line, physical or perceived. Her lens zoomed slightly, framing Marisol and the officers as they converged. The moment hadn't escalated yet. Marisol was just standing there, still half-turned, head tilted in confusion. Tiana's camera caught the initial exchange. No officer. Tiana focused on the way Marisol's posture shifted. Defensive, but not aggressive. Unsure, but not combative. Tiana's heart pounded. Her thumb hovered over the record button, even though it was already red. She thought about calling out, but stayed silent. Her mother's voice echoed, "Protect the moment. Protect yourself. The power is in the footage." Then came the eye contact. One of the officers turned sharply and locked eyes with her. Not with curiosity, not with casual acknowledgement, but with a gaze that weighed her presence, that measured her role, that saw the phone in her hand and made a decision. He began walking toward her. Tiana swallowed. Her instinct said to stay rooted, to document. Her training from countless conversations at her mother's side told her this was the moment you never looked away from. The other officer remained with Marisol, whose shoulders were now tense, her hands raised slightly in that universal posture of. The officer approaching Tiana called out something, too far to hear clearly, but she knew the tone, demanding, accusatory. Her screen kept rolling. People nearby had started to notice. One man nudged his wife. A young boy stopped tossing his frisbee and watched. The neighborhood's stillness was no longer calm. It was the kind of quiet that comes right before the sirens. Tiana adjusted her grip and braced for the confrontation she felt rising like a wave. The officer closed the distance in seconds, his footsteps sharp on the paved walkway. Tiana didn't flinch, though her pulse surged. She kept her phone raised, arms locked in quiet defiance. The officer's voice was clearer now, cutting through the park's murmur. "Step back, or give me the phone." His tone wasn't curious. It wasn't calm. It was a threat wrapped in uniform. Tiana blinked, not from fear but from disbelief. "I'm not interfering," she said, her voice even but firm. "I'm just recording." Her heart raced, but she didn't lower the phone. She didn't run. She stood, the way her mother had taught her, still, clear, and unwavering. The red light on her screen blinked. Every frame mattered. Every second told a story the world might otherwise ignore. The officer took another step forward. "You need to move now." His hand hovered near his belt. Marisol turned, eyes wide, sensing the shift. "She's just filming," she called out. No one else spoke, but the silence screamed. Tiana felt it before it happened. The sharp grip on her wrist, the sudden twist, the jolt of fear that surged up her spine. Her phone wobbled, but stayed in her hand, even as the officer grabbed her arm. "Turn around," he snapped. "Now." "I have the right to," she started, but the words were drowned by the sound of cuffs clicking shut around her wrists. Gasps erupted around them. A woman dropped her iced coffee. A man reached for his phone but hesitated. No one moved. Tiana was spun around, her phone still recording, but pointed to the sky. The scream caught leaves, clouds, a bird in mid-flight, and then nothing but the inside of her purse yanked it from her hand and shoved it inside. They marched her across the grass, past Marisol, who stood frozen in place, lips parted, eyes rimmed with tears. "Tiana?" she whispered, as if hoping the scene might dissolve if she spoke the name out loud, but it didn't. Tiana didn't resist. She walked, cuffs tight against her wrists, chin lifted, a lump burning in her throat. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not here, not in broad daylight, not with bystanders, not when she'd done nothing wrong. Her last clear view before being shoved into the back of the police car was her phone's cracked screen flashing from the open pocket of her purse, the red rec light blinking stubbornly, as if to say, "This happened. This is real." The door slammed shut. The engine started. The world blurred behind tinted glass. And in that instant, as the park grew smaller behind her, the fear wasn't just for herself. It was for the truth. Would anyone believe her if they hadn't seen it for themselves? Would her mother be able to do anything at all? The car pulled away, but the recording had already begun. The moment Tiana was turned around, the shift in the officer's body language became undeniable. What had started as a tense warning had morphed into something sharper, aggressive, uncontrolled. Without warning, the officer shoved her forward with a force that sent her stumbling off the paved path. Her foot caught a raised edge in the concrete, and she crashed forward. The heel of her shoe gave out beneath her, and she hit the ground hard, her knees slamming into the grass before skidding across the dirt. The phone flew from her hand mid-fall. It soared in a slow, spinning arc before it landed screen supply on the sidewalk, cracking on impact. A loud pop echoed through the park as the glass shattered. The screen still glowed faintly, the red recording light blinking behind a spiderweb of fracture. Tiana gasped, the wind knocked out of her. Her palms scraped against the concrete as she tried to push herself up. The metal of the cuffs bit into her skin as her wrists twisted beneath her weight. She barely had time to breathe before the officer grabbed the back of her shirt and yanked her upright, rough hands moving like she was a threat rather than a woman trying to understand what had just happened. Passers-by froze. A mother pulling her child in a wagon stopped mid-step, her eyes wide in disbelief. A man jogging along the path slowed to a halt, phone in hand, uncertain if he should keep walking or start recording. Someone let out a startled, "Hey!" but it died in the thick air as the officer shouted over the scene. "Interference with an investigation," he barked, as if saying it made it true. Tiana winced, still trying to speak. "I was just filming," she whispered, but the words came out thin, shaky, barely audible. Then came the scream, not from Tiana, but from Marisol, who had finally pushed through the gathering crowd. "Get off her!" she yelled. "She didn't do anything." The officer turned toward Marisol, eyes flashing, but he didn't loosen his grip. Instead, he forced Tiana forward, toward the police cruiser idling at the curb. Her knees dragged across the sidewalk before she was fully upright again. Sweat had pooled at the edges of her forehead, stinging her eyes. Her breathing was shallow, fast, but she refused to cry. Not here. Not like this. People began pulling out their phones. Some whispered to each other. A few even started filming, but it was already too late. The moment of escalation had already passed. Tiana had been thrown, cuffed, manhandled, and dragged, all because she'd chosen to stand still and witness. As she passed the cracked remains of her phone on the sidewalk, she realized the footage was likely still there. Recording, broken, but alive. She stared at it as she was marched toward the car, wondering if it would be enough. Wondering if anyone would believe her without it. Wondering how many times this had happened to people whose names no one would ever know. The heat rising off the pavement made everything blur, but Tiana stayed lucid. Her hands throbbed from where the cuffs bit into her wrists, and her elbows were scraped from the fall, but her mind was racing with clarity. She had done nothing wrong, nothing, and yet here she was, being walked like a criminal, past dozens of witnesses, none of whom had stepped forward yet, though many were filming now. The second officer, silent up to this point, moved to intercept Marisol as she stepped forward. "Stay back," he warned, hand on his belt. Marisol stopped, trembling with rage. "You're hurting her," she shouted. Her voice cracked with disbelief, but it didn't reach the officers. It echoed into the crowd, into the park's green space, into the conscience of every person watching. Tiana tried to speak again. "My name is Tiana Green," she said, louder this time. "I'm the daughter of—" But she couldn't finish. The first officer pushed her forward roughly, muttering under his breath, "We don't care who you are." Her stomach dropped. He didn't care. He wasn't curious. He wasn't trying to de-escalate. He wanted control. The press of the metal cuffs against her skin made her vision blur with pain. Her shoulder ached from the way he was twisting her arm. Still, she walked. Still, she held her head up. She wasn't going to beg. She wasn't going to crumble. That's not how she was raised. She thought of her mother, what she'd say when she found out. Tiana had always been proud of her. even if sometimes she wished her mom didn't have to fight so hard, every single day, for justice that should have been basic. But this moment was one her mother had warned her about. "They won't see you first as my daughter," she'd said. "They'll see you as a young black woman holding a black moment. That's what they'll react to. Not your name, not your story, your skin." Now here she was, living that truth. They reached the squad car, parked with its lights flashing but siren off. Tiana's face burned as they opened the door. Her legs nearly gave out when the officer shoved her down into the back seat without warning. Her knees hit the edge of the door frame, and she gasped in pain. But she didn't cry. Not yet. She wasn't going to give them. As the door slammed shut beside her, the crowd behind them had grown. A few shouted questions. "Why are you arresting her? What did she do? She was just recording." But none of the voices mattered. The windows were tinted. The air inside was hot. Her breath came in short gasps as the reality settled like weight in her chest. Not for being violent, not for resisting, but for filming, for being present, for standing with her phone as proof. Her face fell into her hands. She didn't know where they were taking her. She didn't know how long she'd be gone. All she knew was that justice had just turned its back, and no one had stopped it. The patrol car jolted forward, the vibration shaking through the steel frame, rattling her already bruised bones. Tiana leaned her head back against the seat, eyes locked on the blurred shapes moving past the window. Faces of strangers, trees waving in distorted glass, a blue sky that looked so far away now. Her wrists stung, hands numb from the pressure of the handcuffs. But it was her chest that ached the most. Tight. On the sidewalk behind them, her phone still lay where it had fallen. The cracked screen reflected the sun in jagged bursts, still glowing faintly. Miraculously, the camera had never stopped rolling. It caught everything: the initial contact, the shove, the cuffs, the silence of the crowd, a witness even if its owner had been silenced. From the distance, Arthur Hill, an older patrolman, approached the phone as if it were just litter. He bent down, picked it up without examining it, and tucked it into an evidence bag. That act, simple and quiet, marked the end of the park's moment of conscience. The proof of what had been done was now in their hands. Inside the car, Tiana tried to slow her breathing. She had seen videos like this: women pinned down, children crying in the background, a cell phone somewhere off to the side, tilted, capturing truth in pieces. But she had never imagined it would be her, that the story she'd fight for would begin with her own silence, her own humiliation. She thought of the bystanders. Some had reported, others had watched, some froze, some whispered. But no one had stepped forward, not for her, not for the truth. And maybe they were scared, maybe they were confused, but in the end, they'd left her to it. Her lip trembled, and for the first time she felt the tears come. Slow, hot, humiliating. They rolled down her cheeks, washing dust and sweat along with them. Her breath hitched in her throat. The seat was too hot, the air too still. She was caged, and no one could hear her scream now. In the front seat, the officer said nothing. No name, no reason, just silence. As if what had happened didn't need explanation. As if dragging a black woman off the grass in cuffs was routine, expected, acceptable. The car pulled up to the side entrance of the local precinct. A side door, no press, no attention. They wanted this quiet. As the door opened, and the officer pulled her out again by the arm, Tiana turned her head back for one last look at the street, at the park now distant and unreal, the swing sets, the trees, the moment before everything changed. She had walked into that park to laugh, to record joy, to remember. And now, all she could remember was the feel of concrete against her palms, the sound of her phone cracking, and the certainty that no one had expected her to fight back. But she would. This wasn't over, not even close. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like a swarm of flies. The jail's intake room smelled like sweat, metal, and bleach, an odor that clung to skin and settled deep into memory. Tiana sat on a cold steel bench, her hands resting stiffly on her thighs, her fingers still marked with the red lines from the cuffs. Her mouth was dry, her breathing shallow. She couldn't decide if she was angry or just numb. She had been processed, like a criminal. Her name was called, her belongings purse, cracked phone, wallet, confiscated and sealed in a plastic bag. She had been photographed, fingerprinted, and questioned without explanation. Her attempts to speak were dismissed. Her rights weren't read until after her mugshot. She was told she had been arrested for obstruction of justice, though when she asked what exactly she had obstructed, the officer behind the glass had only stared blankly. Now, she sat in an orange jumpsuit that swallowed her body and erased her identity. No one here cared that she was the daughter of Councilwoman Green. No one here cared that she hadn't raised a hand, hadn't uttered a threat, hadn't even moved beyond documenting what she saw. She was just another woman in a jumpsuit now, another file in the system. A thick folder thudded down onto the desk near her as a guard walked by. Tiana jumped slightly at the sound. The officer didn't look at her. None of them did. It was easier not. Easier to pretend she was just like the others. Guilty, dangerous, disposable. She looked at the wall opposite her. It was lined with signs about rights, contact procedures, visitation hours. None of them seemed real. Her reflection in the polished surface of the bench looked even less so. Her hair, once neatly pinned, was now frizzed and flattened. Her eyes were bloodshot. She looked older, tired, like someone who had been taught a brutal lesson in how little justice there really was when no one was watching. But she reminded herself, someone had been. The crowd, the bystanders, and her phone, cracked but recording. That might be enough. That had to be enough. She pressed her hands together in her lap, grounding herself. She thought of her mother. She hadn't gotten to make a call yet. They hadn't even offered, but her mother would find out. Someone would tell her, and when she did, God help them, because Councilman Green didn't wait. She didn't beg. She moved. And if there was one thing she had passed down to Tiana, it was this. Silence can be survival, but only for a moment. Justice requires noise, and Tiana knew this silence would break soon. The world outside hadn't seen her yet, but they would. And when they did, they would not be quiet. Not again. Time passed in strange fragments. Long stretches of silence broken by bursts of sound. A clanging door, a cough from a nearby cell, the creak of a chair behind the glass. Tiana remained seated, back straight, eyes focused forward. She was determined not to slump, not to shrink. Every minute that passed tested her resolve, but she refused to let this place steal more from her than it already had. Across the hall, another woman sat with her head in her hands, rocking gently. She had been brought in earlier, crying about unpaid parking tickets and a suspended license. Tiana had nodded to her, a silent acknowledgement that they were both human, both real, both caught in the machinery of something cold and vast. They hadn't spoken, but the woman's occasional glances were filled with unspoken solidarity. A guard passed by the hallway and paused. He stared at Tiana for a beat longer than usual before muttering something under his breath. She caught part of a entitled media circus. Should have stayed quiet. The words were meant to land, meant to remind her that here she was nothing, but instead they only confirmed what she already knew. Her presence here wasn't about justice. It was about power. That was the part that hurt most. She hadn't interfered. She hadn't shouted or pushed or crossed a barrier. She'd filmed. That was it. That was all. And for that she'd been manhandled, cuffed, paraded in front of neighbors, and shoved into a cell like a threat. It wasn't justice. It wasn't law. It was humiliation. It was a warning. But the warning wasn't working the way they hoped. Every hour that passed, Tiana grew more certain, not less. This wouldn't be buried. She wouldn't be quiet. Her mother had taught her to speak up, to bear witness, to refuse to play small, and now she had no choice but to follow through. The door buzzed, and a uniformed woman stepped in holding a clipboard. "Green," she called, glancing up. "You're being moved." Tiana's heart jumped. Was this it? Was someone coming for her? She stood slowly, legs stiff from sitting. Her mind raced through possibilities. Had they realized who she was? Had someone finally made a call? The woman said nothing else, just gestured. Tiana followed. As they passed the intake desk, she saw her belongings, still sealed in plastic, the phone's cracked screen just barely visible through the fogged bag. That phone held everything. The truth, the moment, the assault. And she knew one thing for sure. If that footage ever saw daylight, this city wouldn't be able to look away. The hallway ahead stretched long and narrow, but at the end, she saw something that made her pulse quicken. A shadow, waiting near the exit. Broad shoulders, a familiar stance. Her mother was here. Tiana's chest tightened as she walked closer. The hallway lights cast long shadows that stretched across the concrete floor, and at the end of them, standing straight in a Taylor navy mousseline, was Councilwoman Dina Green. She was flanked by two attorneys, both stone-faced, both silent, but it was her mother's eyes that locked onto Tiana with a force that stopped her mid-step. It wasn't just worry in that gaze, it was fury, the kind of righteous, maternal fire that only years of fighting battles, personal and political, could forge. "Take those cuffs off my daughter," she said, voice level, but laced with steel. The officer escorting Tiana hesitated. "Ma'am, this is still an active charge. She is a minor. She has no criminal history. She was arrested without cause or Miranda rights. And she was physically assaulted while lawfully documenting a police encounter." Councilwoman Green's voice never rose, but it hit like thunder in the narrow corridor. "I have the video, and so does half the city by now. So unless you want this department on the national news by nightfall, I suggest you unshackle her now." Tiana didn't move. She barely breathed. Watching her mother in this form, a wall, a sword, a force of nature, was both awe-inspiring and grounding. This was what she'd grown up with. This was what she had inherited. The officer, Red 5 now, fumbled with the key. The cuffs clicked open. Tiana rubbed her wrists instinctively, the skin raw and red, but she stood tall. She didn't cry. She didn't look away. She met her mother's gaze head-on. Councilwoman Green stepped forward, placing her hand gently on Tiana's cheek. "Are you hurt?" she asked. "Chiamu," Tiana whispered. Her mother nodded once, slowly. "That's going to change. Today." The attorneys moved into position. One handed Tiana her purse and the sealed plastic bag containing her phone. The screen was still dark, fractured across the top, but the red light, faint as it was, still glowed in one corner. Tiana held it like a relic, like evidence. Councilwoman Green turned to the officers now gathering near the exit. "There will be statements, there will be accountability, and there will be consequences. You picked the wrong daughter, and the wrong mother." With that, she wrapped her arm around Tiana and guided her out the door. The air outside hit like freedom. It smelled of rain and exhaust, of the city's noise returning all at once. Reporters had already gathered, phones raised, microphones pointed. The murmurs turned into questions. Tiana's name echoed from several directions. But for a moment, she ignored them all. She looked at her mother. "You came fast." Councilwoman Green smiled. "Not fast enough." Tiana nodded, eyes fierce. "Let's make sure this never happens again." And together they stepped into the flashbulbs, not as victim and politician, but as daughter and mother, ready to fight. Inside a small side office at the precinct, the air had changed. The tension hadn't vanished. It had morphed. What was once dismissive irony to the officers had shifted into a quiet, uncomfortable awareness. Officer Garrity, the same man who had cuffed and shoved Tiana into the Noah's torpor, now sat frozen in front of a desktop monitor. His partner, Officer Lynch, hovered behind him, arms crossed, eyes darting between the screen and the hallway. The computer screen displayed a news photo. Tiana, younger, standing beside her mother at a ribbon-cutting ceremony for the city's new Youth Empowerment Center. Councilwoman Dina Green's name was bold in the caption, and just underneath it, in smaller letters, "Tiana Green, her daughter and youth mentor, joins her mother for the event." Garrity leaned back slowly in his chair. "Are you serious?" he muttered. "That's her?" Lynch nodded grimly. "Just confirmed it through the department's personnel database. Her emergency contact? Dina Green." A long silence stretched between them. Neither officer said what they were both thinking, but it was loud in the room. They had just violently arrested the daughter of one of the city's most powerful public officials. A woman with media contacts, legal teams, and a track record of public accountability. They hadn't recognized her in the moment. She wasn't wearing a blazer or standing behind a bonium. She had just been another black girl with a phone. Another problem in their path. And they had treated her accordingly. Another officer poked his head into the room. "Captain wants you both in briefing, now." When they arrived, the captain's expression said everything before he opened his mouth. Red-faced, jaw tight, voice low. "What the hell did you two do?" Garrity stammered. "She was filming and..." She looked at the councilwoman's daughter. Lynch started to explain, but the captain cut him off with a wave of his hand. "Do you know how many calls I've taken in the last 15 minutes? From City Hall? From the mayor's office? From reporters who somehow already have her name and a copy of the arrest record?" No one spoke. Slashing, the captain continued, each word like a gavel. "No charges. Full dismissal." Garrity shifted his weight uncomfortably. "Should we apologize?" "No," Captain said, even sharper now. "Don't say anything. Don't touch her. Don't even look at her. Just do what I say, and pray this doesn't end up on national news." The silence that followed was heavy with more than fear. It was the dawning realization of how badly they'd misjudged the situation. Not just the optics, but the person, the humanity. Out in the hallway, Tiana sat with her mother again, wrists finally free, hair pushed behind her ears. Her phone, still shattered, lay in her lap. She hadn't spoken since the cuffs came off. Her mother had measured sharp words directed at everyone from the desk sergeant to the highest-ranking official in the room. But now, as footsteps approached again, the hush returned. Something was about to shift again. The door opened with a slow, measured push. Officer Garrity entered first, followed by a plainclothes supervisor with a clipboard and a carefully composed expression. He didn't look at Tiana or her mother directly. His eyes hovered just above their heads, like he was aiming for neutrality, but only managed cowardice. "Releasing her immediately," the supervisor said, as if reading from a script. "No charges will be filed." Councilwoman Green didn't blink. "And?" There was a pause. He cleared his throat. "Your property will be returned. We're sorry for the delay." Tiana raised her gaze. "Where's my phone?" Another officer emerged with a plastic evidence bag, holding it at arm's length, like it might bite him. Inside, Tiana's phone looked worse than before. The screen was black now, the recording light extinguished. Cracks ran jagged across the surface, and a corner had completely chipped away. It had been dropped, kicked, probably stepped on in the shuffle. It looked like it had survived a war. In some ways it had. She took the bag silently. Her fingers trembled only slightly. "Was the video saved?" she asked, directing the question to no one and everyone at once. There was no answer. Her mother stood. "We'll be conducting a full forensic recovery of the device," she said evenly. "If anything has been deleted, you'll hear from our attorneys and our media contacts." The room didn't shift. It froze. The tension wasn't fear, it was calculation. They knew they couldn't erase what had happened, but now they were trying to contain it. The officer stepped back. A space cleared around Tiana and her mother, not out of courtesy, but because no one wanted to be the next name in the story. As they approached the exit, a younger officer, one who hadn't touched her, hadn't said a word all day, moved aside and whispered, "I'm sorry." It was quiet, almost inaudible. Tiana paused, nodded once, and kept walking. Outside, a small crowd had gathered, reporters, community organizers, neighbors who had seen the video already, because yes, someone had filmed it, not her angle. Not as close, but enough. Enough to see the moment she was slammed, cuffed, dragged. Councilwoman Green stepped to the podium hastily erected outside the station. Tiana stood slightly behind her, still holding her shattered phone. "No one," the councilwoman began, her voice resonating through the amplified speaker, "is above the law, and no one should be beneath its protection either. My daughter did nothing wrong. She was assaulted for holding a camera, and if it hadn't been for her last name, she might still be in a cell right now." Flashes erupted from cameras, phones filmed, microphones surged forward. "This isn't about family," she said. "It's about fairness." And Tiana, standing behind her mother, no longer looked like the scared girl from the back seat of a police cruiser. She looked like a storm waiting to speak. As the press conference concluded, Councilwoman Green stepped down from the podium and pulled Tiana close, not just as a gesture of maternal protection, but as a signal. This was her daughter, but this fight belonged to everyone. The moment wasn't just about political optics or public sympathy. It was about power, the kind reclaim it. As reporters shouted follow-ups. Will there be disciplinary action against the officers? Was the video recovered? Will charges be filed? Tiana stepped forward without cue. Her voice was calm, steady, but unmistakably raw. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said. "I filmed, that's all. And I'm not the first person this has happened to. I just happened to have a mother who could pull me out." She held up her phone, the shattered screen a brutal, silent symbol of the day. Most people don't. There was a stillness in the crowd. Even the reporters lowered their mics slightly. "This isn't about getting revenge," she continued. "This is about making sure the next person doesn't have to call their mother just to survive a walk through the park." Councilwoman Green stepped beside her, one hand resting lightly on her daughter's back. She looked over the crowd and added, "We've filed a formal complaint with Internal Affairs. But more than that, we're pushing for a review of every arrest made under this interference statute. Because this law isn't protecting anyone, it's punishing the wrong people." The crowd erupted in scattered applause and nods of support. Among them stood activists, faith leaders, and even off-dusty public defenders who had seen this cycle before. Young black people brutalized, silenced, then blamed. But this time, the silence had been recognized in time to intervene. Still, Tiana couldn't shake the ache that sat beneath her collarbone. Yes, she was free. Yes, the cameras were on their side now. But the damage had been done. The cuffs had closed around her wrists. Her dignity had been scraped across concrete. The officers hadn't known who she was, but that wasn't the real issue. The issue was that it shouldn't have mattered. That night, back at home, she sat in her room with the broken phone beside her. A local tech expert had taken a look and confirmed that the footage was salvageable. Every frame, every word. Soon, it would be public. The truth couldn't be suppressed now. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, bruise still faint on her cheek, eyes ringed with exhaustion, and whispered to herself, "They're going to remember my name." Not because of who her mother was, but because of what they did. And because she didn't let them get away with it. The image hit social media before Tiana had even gotten home. A single frame, clipped from shaky bystander footage, showed her cracked phone lying face up on the sidewalk, the jagged lines on its screen catching sunlight like broken glass. Around it, blurred shadows of uniformed officers loomed in the background, barely visible, but the message was clear. Something violent had happened, and someone had made sure it was seen. Within an hour, the photo was reposted hundreds of times. Hashtags ignited like brushfire. Free Aniaki Shop. She was recording "This is why we film." A local activist account with nearly 50,000 followers tweeted it with the caption, "They broke her phone, they tried to break her story, but we're still watching." From there, the spread was exponential. Clips from the incident began surfacing, filmed by parkgoers who had stayed behind as the chaos unfolded. A short video, 37 seconds long, showed Tiana being shouted at by an officer. Another showed her being yanked forward by the arm, A third, shakier but more damning, caught the moment she was pushed to the ground. The audio was messy, but her scream was clear, and her voice still steady despite it all, saying, "I'm not interfering, I'm filming." By midday, the video had surpassed 200,000 views. By evening, it had climbed to 1 million. Major media outlets took notice. First, the local stations, WWRC7, Channel 4, then the regional news, followed by national feeds. The caption on the evening broadcast read, "Young black woman arrested while filming. Turns out she's the councilwoman's daughter." Tiana sat on the edge of her bed, phone in hand. Not the broken one. The spare backup her mother had given her, hastily reactivated and synced to her account. Her Twitter feed moved too fast to follow. She scrolled slowly anyway, reading each mention, each message of solidarity. Strangers called her brave. Friends posted old photos of them marching at youth rallies, now under the banner of her name. Celebrities had begun to weigh in. A well-known journalist posted, "If Tiana Green didn't have a powerful last name, she'd still be locked up. Think about that." It was surreal. Her name was everywhere. But the feeling in her stomach wasn't pride. It was pressure. She hadn't asked for this spotlight. She hadn't prepared to become a symbol. She just wanted the truth out. She wanted to be treated like a person, not a prop for an officer's insecurity or a hashtag for the internet. Downstairs, her mother was preparing for another press conference. The living room had been transformed into a war room. Staffers coordinated talking points. Legal experts filtered in and out. And through it all, Councilwoman Green's voice stayed calm, focused. She had been here before, in scandal, in crisis. But this time, it was personal. Still, she wasn't shaken. She was mobilizing. Tiana stood at the top of the stairs, watching, listening. She knew this moment was bigger than her. And, like it or not, it had begun. The next morning, Councilwoman Green stood at the front of a packed city press room. The podium bore the city seal, but the words she spoke came from a deeper place, somewhere between fury and maternal defiance. Her voice was controlled, but it carried the weight of someone who had been silenced before and would never allow it again. "My daughter was arrested for filming," she began. "She was not violent, she was not disruptive, she did not obstruct justice. She simply recorded it." Flashes from cameras punctuated each sentence. Reporters scribbled notes or typed furiously, live tweeting the event to an audience hungry for answers. Councilwoman Green continued, "Let me be clear, this is not about special treatment. If she had been anyone's daughter, this would still be wrong. We cannot live in a city where public servants treat transparency as a threat." By her stood representatives from several civil rights organizations, including the local ACLU chapter and leaders from local grassroots coalitions. They didn't speak, but their presence echoed a message. This wasn't just about one family. This was about a culture of impunity, a system used to its own power. "My daughter's phone is broken," she added, holding up the shattered device in a clear evidence bag for everyone to see. "But what it captured cannot be erased." Reporters asked questions in rapid succession. Will the officers be suspended? Is Tiana planning legal action? Was the footage tampered with? Councilwoman Green took each one methodically. "We are in consultation with our legal team. All footage will be released. And yes, we are pursuing accountability at every level." Tiana, who stood just off stage, watched the entire scene through a curtain of fatigue. Her body still ached in places the cameras hadn't caught. Her mind played the arrest back in pieces. How quickly it happened, how cold the cell had been, how hard it was to breathe as the door slammed shut. But as she watched her mother speak, something shifted inside her. The world hadn't forgotten. Her voice hadn't been lost. It had been magnified. Across town, protests had begun to gather steam. Students from the local college marched through campus with signs reading, "Justice for Tiana," and "Filming is not a crime." Small businesses began placing her face in their windows beneath the phrase, "We stand with Tiana." Social media feeds lit up with support, commentary, and analysis. Even Tiana's old high school joined the movement. Her former teachers organized a moment of silence during morning announcements. Her classmates sent messages of pride and disbelief. They remembered her as the girl who once ran the debate team, the one who stayed late to help clean up after assemblies. Now she was something else entirely, a symbol. But in private, Tiana still felt human, still bruised, still trying to catch up to the speed at which the world had grabbed hold of her story. And deep down, she knew this was just the beginning. The attention was fire, but fire only helped if it led to light, or change, or both. The momentum spread far beyond their city limits. National news networks ran headlines like, "Councilwoman's daughter arrested for filming police. Public outcry builds." News anchors dissected the footage, slowed it down, highlighted the moment her phone fell to the pavement, and the raw audio of her saying, it was all over evening talk shows, cable news, political roundtable. On TikTok and Instagram, creators stitched the clips together with commentary, tears, and outrage. Young activists made videos standing in front of courthouses, holding up handmade signs that read, "Protect our daughters, film everything," and simply Tiana. The sound of her voice from the recordings, shaky but strong, became an anthem layered into viral edits. Her pain had become protest fuel. But Tiana watched all this with mixed emotions. Her name was on the mouths of millions, but her body still remembered the concrete floor, the cold cuffs, the sterile holding room. She hadn't asked to become a symbol. She hadn't wanted to be famous for surviving violence. That night, she sat on the front porch with her mother, their neighborhood quiet except for a few distant sirens and the rustle of leaves. Tiana's new phone buzzed non-stop, texts, mentions, tags, but she let it sit beside her, untouched. "I don't know if I'm ready," she finally said, her voice low. "You don't have to be," her mother replied, "but you are not alone." That was what made the difference. From inside the house, the television played footage of a march happening downtown. Dozens of people holding signs, walking past the police department, chanting her name. The organizers had already planned a citywide demonstration for the weekend. Local artists had painted a mural of her silhouette, holding up a broken phone beneath the words, "We see you." What had begun as a moment of humiliation had transformed into something powerful. Still, Tiana knew this wasn't the end. Viral didn't mean vindicated. Views didn't equal justice, but it was a start. And sometimes, the start was the most dangerous moment. For the system, for the silence, for those who thrived on fear. She leaned into her mother's shoulder, let the quiet wrap around them. It wouldn't last long. The fight ahead was massive. Policy, legal pressure, institutional resistance. But she also knew something had already changed. The public had seen what happened to her, and once seen, it could not be unseen. Her story, her image, her voice, they were out there now, echoing in streets, screens, and hearts. And somewhere deep inside her, beneath the bruises and the pressure and the fatigue, a seed of something stronger began to grow. Resolve. Inside the downtown police headquarters, the tone had shifted overnight. The chief of police, a grizzled woman named Carla Monroe, strode into the command conference room like a wildfire in boots. She didn't wait for the usual greetings or for everyone to settle into their chairs. She slammed a folder onto the table and said, "This department has a cancer. We're going to cut it out." The room fell silent. Deputy chiefs, precinct captains, union reps, all of them looked at her like they weren't sure if she was angry or furious. She was both. Chief Monroe had served for 3 decades, and she'd seen the department weather scandals before. But this was different. This was personal, not to her necessarily, but to the city she swore to protect. And now the people were watching with eyes wide open. She pulled out a list of recent arrests under the interference with public duties charge. 87 in the last 2 years. Want to guess how many were black or brown? No one answered. She tapped the paper. 78. 89%. This charge has become a shield for misconduct. Still, no one spoke. "We're opening an audit," she declared, "effective immediately. Every use of force report from the last 5 years, every arrest where video footage disappeared, every complaint that was dismissed without follow-up." Maya Cole, head of internal affairs, nodded slowly. She was already pulling out her notepad. Cole wasn't afraid of getting her hands dirty. She'd built her reputation on accountability, even when it made her unpopular. "We'll need access to shift rosters, body cam logs, and disciplinary files," Cole said. "Every officer involved in an interference arrest in the last 18 months is getting reviewed." The union rep spoke up, cautious. "Computer, that kind of sweep is overdue," Monroe cut him off. "This isn't about protecting reputations anymore. This is about survival, institutional survival. Because if we don't do this ourselves, the city council will, the courts will, and public opinion, that ship already sailed." Across the room, a young officer named Carter, only 2 years into the force, looked down at his hands. He hadn't cuffed Tiana, he hadn't pushed her, but he'd been there, watching, silent. Chief Monroe turned to the room once more. "If any of you have information, now's the time. If you've seen something, heard something, covered or someone, kicks it, or you're part of the problem." The silence deepened. Somewhere a phone vibrated on a desk. Outside, the protests hadn't slowed. Inside, the reckoning had just begun. Cole stood and gathered her things. "We start tonight." Maya Cole walked with brisk purpose through the narrow hallway of the Archives Division, flanked by 2 members of her internal review team. They carried clipboards, flash drives, and sealed evidence boxes marked ICR implant/use off system. The room smelled of old paper, toner, and something more subtle, something stale, like buried truth. They began with the files from 2 years ago, organizing reports into categories: use of force incidents, public complaints, internal memos, and body camera discrepancies. Maya assigned 1 investigator to look exclusively at digital records, footage from high-profile arrests that had either lost connectivity or suffered storage failure. That phrase, storage failure, appeared so frequently. In the logs, it had become a red flag all on its own. The deeper they dug, the more patterns emerged. Complaint after complaint from citizens who described officers behaving aggressively once a camera was pulled out. Cases where charges were dropped, but the videos disappeared. Entries signed off with language like, "No follow-up necessary," or "Officer acted with indiscretion," rubber stamps of indifference. In one file, Maya found 3 complaints in the same week against Officer Garrity, the very man who'd shoved Tiana, each alleging intimidation during peaceful filming. 2 were dismissed with no interviews conducted. The third, the complainant, never responded. Maya wondered if they'd even been contacted. "This isn't just negligence," she muttered to her team. "This is active suppression." Her assistant investigator Darnell leaned over another stack of files. "Here's something. Check this shift log. Garrity's body cam was off the entire time. Of 1 interference arrest 2 months ago, and the officer who backed him up filed a separate statement that contradicts it." Maya's eyes narrowed. "Flag it. Let's pull the footage from the backup unit." They moved to the video terminal, accessing department servers with administrator credentials. It took time. Passwords, ID scans, log confirmations, but eventually they found a file labeled with the date and incident number. A few seconds into the video, the screen glitched just like several others they'd reviewed, but unlike most, this time the file didn't stop. It played. It showed an officer, Garrity again, approaching a man standing with a cell phone. There was no resistance, no verbal threat, just a question. "Why are you recording?" And then a hand reaching out, slapping the phone down, the camera spinning. The man screamed, "I have a right to," before the audio cut. Maya turned to her team. "We're building a pattern now. We've got timestamps, complaints, video. It's not just about Tiana anymore. It never was." She jotted notes for the chief and prepped a report. This department has silenced people for too long. If we don't expose this now, it'll bury us later. And quietly, in a separate room down the hall, Officer Carter stood alone by the locker room door. He wasn't under investigation, not yet, but guilt wasn't bound by subpoenas, and what he carried inside couldn't be filed away. He turned and walked toward Little Cole's office. It was time to talk. Officer Carter stood just outside the Cole's office, heart pounding harder than he expected. He had rehearsed this moment in his head a dozen times, but now that he was here, the words stuck to his ribs. Still, he knocked. Cole looked up from her desk. "Carter, come in." He entered slowly, shut the door behind him, and stood awkwardly in front of her desk for a beat, before he finally spoke. "I need to tell you something about what happened to Tiana Green, and some things that happened before." Cole nodded, offering no reaction, just space. "I wasn't the one who laid hands on her," he said, "but I was there. I saw Garrity get in her face. I saw the phone hit the ground. I saw the cuffs go on, and I said nothing." He swallowed hard. "I've seen other things too. Moments where we've crossed the line. Rough takedowns, intimidation, targeting people for just filming. I always thought keeping quiet was staying neutral, that it wasn't my place to challenge what wasn't directly mine." He took a breath. "I was wrong." Cole leaned forward. "Are you ready to go on the record?" He nodded. "Yes. I've started compiling notes. I've saved body cam logs from my own shifts. I want to show you incidents where things didn't match up with the reports. And I've marked when I was there and I did nothing. That has to be in the file too." Cole's gaze softened slightly, just for a moment. Doing the right thing after the fact is still doing the right thing. This matters. He placed a flash drive on her desk. "There's footage here. Incidents from 6 months ago to now. Not everything, just what I could save without raising suspicion." "Now?" she asked. He looked down, then back at her. "Because Tiana's face looked like my sister's. Because when I saw the phone on the ground, I thought, what if it was me, or someone I loved? And because I didn't come into this job to hurt people. But silence makes me part of that hurt." Cole took the flash drive and set it beside her growing stack of evidence. "You may be asked to testify." "I'm ready," Carter said, "if it helps fix what's broken." She nodded again, slowly. "We'll start a formal interview tomorrow. I want you to write your account in full tonight. No edits, no filters." He left the room lighter than when he entered, though the weight of what he'd seen and done would stay with him. Behind him, her old locked flash drive in the evidence safe, then sat back in her chair. The arc of justice was slow, she knew, but it just moved a few inches closer to what it was meant to be. Not just because of a headline, not just because of pressure, but because one officer chose truth over silence. And truth, she thought, was what might finally turn this tide. The city council chamber had never seen a crowd like this. Every seat was filled. Extra chairs had been hauled in and still weren't enough. Dozens stood shoulder to shoulder in the back, spilling into the hallway. The gallery buzzed with tension, but it wasn't chaotic. It was focused. Residents had come with purpose, and that purpose carried Tiana Green's name. At the front of the chamber, Councilwoman Green sat poised, flanked by colleagues. Her posture was upright, her expression unshaken, but anyone who knew her could see the deeper emotion behind her composed face. This wasn't just legacy. This was legacy. On the agenda were 3 proposals, each part of a reform package inspired directly by what had happened to Tiana. A citywide ban on arresting civilians for recording public servants, a civilian oversight committee with subpoena power, and mandatory public release of body cam footage within 30 days of use. The microphone crackled as Councilwoman Green leaned in. Her voice, calm and resolute, echoed through the high ceilings. "We are not here to discuss hypotheticals. We are here because something real happened, something violent, something that never should have occurred in the first place, she began. Cameras rolled. Reporters from local and national outlets lined the walls, capturing every second. Young activists held signs in their laps. We support Green, protect the right to record, and simply, Tiana. Councilwoman Green continued, my daughter was arrested for using her phone. That's the fact. But even if she were not my daughter, even if she were a stranger to me, the injustice would be just as real, and our obligation to fix it would be just as urgent. Applause broke out, loud but brief. The chair of the meeting banged the gavel gently, asking for decorum. But the energy in the room didn't fade. It simmered. One by one, the other council members took turns speaking. Some were supportive, echoing her call for change. Others raised questions about scope, implementation, and funding. And then came the expected opposition. Councilman Duval, a veteran member known for his law and order stance, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat before leaning toward the mic. I want to be very careful here, he began, because I understand the emotional weight of this situation. But we must remember that laws already exist to prevent abuse. What we're considering today risks undermining our police officers who are doing their jobs under difficult circumstances. A ripple of discontent moved through the crowd. Whispers turned to murmurs. Tiana, seated in the front row beside her mother's aide, kept her hands folded tightly in her lap. Councilman Duval pressed on. I sympathize deeply with Councilwoman Green. I do. But let's not rush to solutions that demonize an entire department based on one incident. No matter how disturbing. Councilwoman Green remained still, but her eyes locked onto Duval's. The gavel tapped again for order, and just behind her, Tiana straightened her spine. Her moment to speak was coming, and she was ready. A name was called next. The chamber grew quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't just expect words, it demands them. She stood, slowly, her hands trembling just enough to notice if you were watching closely, and many were. She walked the short distance to the podium with measured steps, the same way she'd walked to the front of her 8th grade debate class all those years ago, guided by the same woman now seated just behind her. She adjusted the mic. My name is Tiana Green, she began, her voice thin but audible. I'm 23 years old. I've lived in this city my entire life. I've attended our public schools. I've volunteered at our food pantries. I've voted in every election since I turned 18. And last week, I was arrested in our city park for holding my phone. She paused. The weight of that moment sat on her chest, but she kept going. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't interfering. I was recording my friend being questioned by police. I was scared, but I stood there, quietly, with my phone out, because I was taught by my mom, by my teachers, by this very city, that it's my right to record public officials in public spaces. Her voice wobbled, but didn't break. She reached into her pocket and held up the shattered remains of her old phone, its glass splintered, casing dented. This is what was left after they shoved me to the ground, she said. This, and a scar on my arm. But those aren't the parts that hurt the most. What hurt more was the way they looked at me, like I was disposable, like I didn't matter. A long breath. Another pause. I've heard the argument that this isn't about race, that this is just a misunderstanding. But I ask you, if I had been white, if I had looked like the daughter of a different council member, would the officer have told me to shut up and shoved me into the dirt? Murmurs filled the room again. No one answered, but no one needed to. Tiana's voice grew stronger. I'm not here today because I want attention. I'm here because this didn't just happen to me. It's happened to others who didn't have a platform, people who didn't go viral, people whose names you don't know. And if we don't change the system that let it happen to me, then we are saying, loudly and clearly, that it can happen again. She closed her speech with a quiet plea. Please, do the right thing, not just for me, For everyone who won't get the chance to speak in front of you. For every kid who walks into a park and wonders if filming something wrong will get them hurt. Then she stepped back from the mic. For a second, the silence was absolute. And then the room erupted. The applause wasn't polite. It was thunderous. People stood. Some clapped through tears. Others shouted Tiana's name as if it were a rallying cry. Tiana, Tiana filled the chamber. Even council members who had planned to stay neutral sat with stunned expressions, moved not just by her words, but by the rawness, the courage it took to deliver them. Outside the building, the protesters heard the reaction and began to chant in rhythm with the applause. "We believe Tiana! We believe Tiana!" Their voices bled through the glass windows, joined by the drums and megaphones of organizers who'd camped outside since morning. The building, once an icon of city bureaucracy, now pulsed like a heartbeat with a different kind of energy. Councilwoman Green rose from her seat, briefly placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder as she passed. Her face was a study in pride and pain, tempered by the knowledge that political change, even the kind built on courage, never came easy. Council members who had expressed doubts earlier requested time to revisit the proposals. The police union rep, once rigid in opposition, now found himself surrounded by reporters asking if the union would consider bias training reforms. More importantly, a motion was put forth to adopt the first part of the reform package immediately, the ordinance protecting the right to record law enforcement. The vote was scheduled for the following week, but the mood in the room had already shifted. Support had grown, not because of a political maneuver, but because of a single, painful truth spoken out loud by someone brave enough to bear it. As the crowd filtered out, many approached Tiana with quiet gratitude. A grandmother with a cane pressed a note into her hand. "You spoke for all of us," it read. "For my grandson, for my brother who got stopped, for my son who never came home." Reporters asked for interviews. Photographers snapped her photo as she and her mother exited the chamber, walking shoulder to shoulder into the late afternoon light. The crowd outside parted slightly, allowing them through, before gathering again like a wave closing around them, protective, proud, and determined. Tiana didn't say much afterward. She didn't have to. She had said enough. And her words had landed where they needed to. Deep in the hearts of people who were tired of being silenced. People ready to change the city they called home. It wasn't victory yet, but it was a spark. One that could spread, if protected, if fanned by courage and truth. And Tiana Green, daughter, student, had lit it herself. The conference room was small, windowless, and stripped of any decoration that could ease the heaviness of what was about to happen. A metal table stood in the center, with two chairs facing each other. One was already occupied. Tiana sat quietly, her posture composed, her face unreadable. She'd asked for this meeting, and though part of her dreaded it, she knew it had to happen. The door opened. Officer Lasky entered wearing civilian clothes. No badge, no belt, no nameplate. He looked different without the uniform, smaller somehow, less confident. He held a folder in his hand and didn't meet her eyes right away. "Diana," he said, voice tentative, "thank you for agreeing to meet." She nodded once. "I'm not here for apologies," she said. "I'm here for the truth." He pulled the chair back and sat, exhaling sharply like he'd been holding his breath for days. "I deserve that," he admitted, "and more." Silence stretched between them. It wasn't awkward, it was charged. Lasky stared at his hands for a long moment, before finally speaking. "I watched that video of myself, what I did to you, and I didn't recognize the person on the screen. But the truth is, I did that. No matter how I tried to excuse it in my head, I did that." She didn't respond. He went on, "When I approached you, all I saw was a challenge. I didn't see a young woman. I didn't see someone exercising her rights. I saw a threat. And that was my first instinct. That's a problem, and I know it." Tiana's voice was quiet but firm. "Why did you see me as a threat?" Lasky looked up, and for the first time his eyes held hers. "Because I was trained to," he said. "Not directly. No one handed me a manual on how to treat people differently. But it was there. The jokes in the locker room, the way other officers handled certain calls, the language, the assumptions. Over time, it got into me. I didn't question it." He shook his head. "Until that day in the park." Tiana sat forward slightly. "Do you understand what you did to me?" He nodded, visibly holding back emotion. "I do now. I humiliated you. I violated your rights. I made you feel unsafe in a place that's supposed to be peaceful. I took your voice and tried to silence it." Her voice trembled, but it didn't break. "You didn't just take my voice. You made me afraid. And it wasn't just fear of you, it was fear of everything you represented. The badge, the authority, the silence that came after." Lasky swallowed hard. He slid the folder across the table toward her. "What's this?" she asked. "Incidents, internal reports, times when I was involved in similar arrests. Times when I saw others cross the line and said nothing. I compiled them all. Dates, names, descriptions. It's not complete justice, but it's what I can give. Truth." Tiana stared at the folder for a long time before placing her hand on it. Then, finally, she said, "Start with telling the world what you just told me." Officer Laska took a deep breath, sitting back slightly in his chair, and, for the first time in their conversation, he didn't look like a man performing contrition. He looked like someone sitting in the rubble of a life he'd helped tear down. His voice was quieter now, stripped of the defensive edge she'd expected from him. There was no badge between them anymore, no chain of command, no press cameras. Just two people confronting the consequences of a single violent moment, and the years of systems that enabled it. "I spent the last week thinking about what I could say to fix this," he said, "but I realized fixing it isn't something I get to decide. That's not mine to own. What I can do is own the harm." He gestured toward the folder again. "The last 10 years of my career, not everything, just the moments I either contributed to or watched and stayed quiet. Things that were buried, things I buried, because I didn't want to be the guy who turned on his brothers. But silence protected the wrong people." Tiana opened the folder. She skimmed the top few pages, scanning arrest dates, internal memos, and reports marked "Resolved, no action taken." Her stomach tightened. He said, "They're not just paperwork. They're real people. Did you ever go back to them? Any of them?" Lasky shook his head. "No, and I don't know if I should, but I will testify. I'll answer questions. I'll stand behind every word in that file." Tiana looked at him for a long moment. She saw a man unraveling, not from panic, but from truth. Someone who had finally pulled the thread on the lie he'd been living, and didn't look away when it started to fall apart. "I want to believe you mean this," she said, "but belief isn't what I need. I need proof. That list, it's a start, but what happens when you walk out that door? When the cameras come back, will you still tell the truth when it's your career on the line?" Lasky said, his voice firmer now. "Because I know what it feels like to lose your dignity in front of a crowd, and I know that no one should ever feel that, from someone wearing a badge." Tiana closed the folder and leaned back. "Then you have work to do, and it starts with signing your name to every word in here." He nodded. "And not as an officer," she added, "as a citizen, as someone who helped break trust, and now has to earn it back." He stood slowly, placing a hand over the folder, then pulling it back respectfully. "I'll be the first to testify," he said, "but not the last." Tiana gave him one last look, full of calm strength. "Make sure of that." After Officer Lasky left the room, Tiana sat alone with the folder in front of her. She didn't open it again, not yet. Her fingers rested gently on the cover, absorbing the weight of everything inside. She had come expecting either a hollow apology or defensiveness wrapped in technical excuses. What she received instead was something more complicated. A man broken open, not seeking forgiveness, but accountability. She wasn't sure what to do with that yet, but she knew it mattered. Outside the room, the world was already changing. The mayor's office had scheduled a press conference for the following morning, the city's police review board had announced emergency hearings, and Tiana's name had become a symbol, not of a victim, but of resistance that didn't buckle under pressure. Still, in this quiet moment, she didn't feel like a symbol. She felt like a daughter, a citizen, a young woman still nursing the wound of fear. Lasky had said something she couldn't let go of, that he saw her as a threat, that his instinct, his gut reaction, had been suspicion. That reality didn't disappear because of one meeting, but maybe it could start to change. Tiana stood and walked slowly to the hallway, where her mother waited. Councilwoman Green looked up as her daughter emerged, noting the unreadable expression on her face. "Well?" she asked softly. Tiana nodded, the weight of the folder still in her arms. "He told the truth," she said. "And he didn't ask me to forgive him." Her mother took that in. "That's something," she said. "It is," Tiana agreed, "but it's not everything." They walked side by side toward the exit, past rows of staffers and office doors, past framed awards and mission statements etched into walls. A city can inscribe its ideals anywhere, but those ideals only lived in how it treated people in rooms like the one she'd just left. As they approached the glass doors, a young staffer stopped them. "Miss Green," she said, handing Tiana a sealed envelope. "It's from the internal review team. They've already verified 2 of the cases Officer Lasky submitted. They're reopening them." Tiana took the envelope, heart tight with the slow, stubborn feeling of hope. After so many days of feeling like a headline, she felt something else now, like a participant in the long, grueling work of repair. And as she stepped into the daylight, wind rustling the edges of the folder in her hands, she didn't feel vindicated. She felt responsible. That, she realized, was what power really looked like. Not dominance, not vengeance, but the choice to take truth and build something better with it. Even if you had to do it one broken story at a time. The hearing room for the city's disciplinary review board was stark and clinical, but the atmosphere inside was anything but. Cameras lined the back wall. Citizens, journalists, and legal observers filled every seat. The tension was thick with anticipation, but this time, it was sharpened by something else: clarity. The facts were laid bare, the video footage, the body cam logs, and the undeniable trail of misconduct. Officer Lasky stood before the panel, no longer wearing the uniform he had once used as a shield. Today, he wore a plain black suit, and his eyes stayed low as each violation was read aloud. There were no dramatics, no angry denials, no desperate excuses. He accepted each charge with the same stillness that had marked his confession to Tiana. After nearly an hour of procedural review, the chair of the disciplinary board, a former judge with a reputation for fairness and gravity, cleared her throat and looked directly at Lasky. Repeated violations of civil rights, failure to follow procedural safeguards, and conduct unbecoming of a public servant, the board unanimously recommends immediate termination and full decertification, she said. There were no cheers, no applause, just silence, weighted with consequence. Officer Lasky nodded once. His termination meant more than just the loss of a job. It meant he could never again wear a badge in that city or anywhere else. He had been stripped of the authority he once abused, and though no ruling could erase the past, this one carved a new precedent into the city's history: transparency, accountability, and the refusal to look away. As Lasky left the room, he passed Councilwoman Green in the hallway. Their eyes met only briefly. There was no animosity in her face, only a solemn recognition of the work ahead. Behind closed doors, the board reconvened to discuss Officer Carter. His case was different. He hadn't used force. He hadn't initiated the confrontation, but he hadn't intervened either. He had watched, stayed silent, and left that silence unbroken until days later when he came forward with body cam evidence and statements corroborating Tiana's account. He sat stiffly in his chair, waiting for the verdict. A failure to intervene in an active misconduct situation and for withholding material evidence until prompted by investigation, Officer Carter will receive a formal reprimand, the judge said. However, in light of his eventual cooperation and truthfulness, he will remain on the force under supervised review and will undergo mandatory retraining. Carter nodded, relief and shame etched into his face in equal measure. The board wasn't just handing out punishment, it was rebuilding trust. Each decision was followed by public disclosure. Every file reopened, every name on Lasky's list was contacted, their voices brought into the light. In just 1 week, a department that once operated behind closed doors had turned itself inside out. And at the center of that transformation was a young woman whose voice had once been drowned in concrete and steel. Tiana didn't attend the disciplinary hearing in person. She watched it from home, curled into the corner of the living room couch, laptop propped on a pillow, the screen glowing softly against the early afternoon light. She didn't need to be in that room to feel the weight of the moment. She carried it with her. When the ruling came down, she didn't cry. She didn't cheer. She simply closed the laptop and sat still for a long time. The silence that followed was heavier than applause, more meaningful than any headline. It was the silence of knowing that something long broken had finally been acknowledged, and that her voice had helped make that happen. The house was quiet except for the rustle of leaves outside. She stood slowly, walked out the back door, and stepped onto the wooden porch, where the swing still creaked with the memory of her childhood. The roses in the garden bloomed a deep red, their petals just beginning to open under the afternoon sun. Tiana eased into the swing, letting it rock her gently. She closed her eyes and breathed in the scent of the roses. The freshly cut grass, the hint of jasmine her mother always kept near the door. Moments later, Councilwoman Green stepped outside, a mug of tea in her hand. She didn't speak right away. She sat beside her daughter, placing the mug carefully on the armrest between them. "Watch it?" she asked softly. Tiana nodded. "You okay?" She thought about the question. It wasn't just about the hearing. It was about everything that had come before and everything still waiting. "I don't know," Tiana said honestly. "I'm not mad anymore, but I'm not done." Her mother nodded, understanding. "You're allowed to feel that. This work doesn't end with one ruling." "I know," Tiana said, "but it feels different now, like people are finally paying attention." Her mother sipped her tea. "They are, but they'll forget too. That's the hard part. Movements don't die from lack of outrage. They fade when no one keeps watch." Tiana looked out at the garden. "Then I'll keep watch." They sat together in silence again, the kind that only exists between people who know the same pain, carry the same legacy. The porch swing creaked. A breeze lifted the edges of Tiana's shirt. Her mother reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You've done more than I ever could have imagined," she said, "and I am so proud of you." Tiana leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. "I didn't do it alone." "No," her mother agreed, "but you were the first one to say something, and that made all the difference." They stayed like that as the sun dipped lower in the sky, letting the days settle into memory. For the first time in weeks, there was no emergency to respond to, no microphone to stand behind, no headline to chase, just the porch, the flowers, and the quiet peace of justice beginning to take root. Later that evening, the city released its first official transparency report. It was a slim 20-page document, but its contents hit harder than any press conference. It listed the number of citizen complaints over the past decade, categorized by officer, and for the first time in the city's history, detailed which of those complaints had led to investigations, which had been dismissed, and which had simply disappeared without a trace. Tiana sat at the kitchen table scrolling through the digital version. Her name wasn't in it, but she didn't need it to be. She could see her presence between the lines, in the columns that now existed because someone had made enough noise to force the truth out into daylight. Her mother stood at the stove, making tea again. They hadn't talked much since sitting on the porch, but there was no tension, just quiet reflection. A peace earned, not assumed. "Want a cup?" her mother asked. "Ian," Tiana replied. "Thanks." They sat together again, this time at the kitchen table, sharing a moment that felt heavier than any applause or news segment. This was what victory really looked like: modest, warm, unfinished. "There's still a long row," her mother said. "More officers, more names. The real change, that's in the system. Policies, training, leadership." "I know," Tiana said, "but at least we're not starting in the dark anymore." Her mother nodded. "No, we're not." The next morning, an email arrived in Tiana's inbox from the city manager's office. It invited her to join a new community oversight task force, one made up of citizens, not just officials, that would have direct access to internal police data, training curriculum, and hiring standards. It wasn't just a ceremonial post, it was power, real oversight, and she had earned her seat at the table. She didn't reply right away. She let it sit in her inbox while she watered the garden, watched the morning light play off the rose petals, and thought about everything that had brought her here. The fear, the anger, the humiliation, and the choice she'd made not to shrink. When she finally sat back down at her desk, she opened the email, clicked accept, and typed 3 words beneath her name. Ready to serve. Because she was. Because justice wasn't just about calling out wrongdoing. It was about showing up day after day until right had a fighting chance. And for the first time since that awful afternoon in the park, she didn't feel like a target. She felt like the beginning of something better. The town hall was filled with rows of folding chairs, but for once, they weren't just occupied by concerned citizens demanding answers. This time the room buzzed with a cautious but genuine optimism. Families sat beside activists, elders whispered to teenagers, and local reporters stood quietly at the back of the room, not hunting for scandal, but waiting for signs of change. At the front, a large screen displayed the city's new police transparency initiative. Councilwoman Green took the podium, her presence calm and commanding. "Today," she began, "we're not just talking about accountability, we're delivering it." She clicked a button on the remote and the first slide appeared, a graphic of the new body-worn camera policy. All patrol officers would be required to wear and activate their body cams for every citizen encounter. Footage would be reviewed randomly, and failure to comply would result in disciplinary areas. No more missing footage. Next, she introduced the Independent Civilian Oversight Board, composed of community members, legal experts, and retired judges. The board would have subpoena power, access to internal records, and the authority to recommend discipline or policy changes. Applause broke out, not thunderous, but firm, the kind that said people were listening. Finally, she unveiled the complaint accounting system, a public-facing website where residents could file concerns, track the progress of investigations, and view summaries of resolved cases. It was transparency made real, accessible, and accountable. "I know this won't fix the past," she said, pausing, "but it ensures the future has fewer shadows, and that's what we owe each other." From the back row, Tiana watched silently. She wasn't up front. She didn't want to be. Her work had never been about the spotlight, but she could feel the ripple of her own courage in every policy slide, every legal clause. She saw her fingerprint in the lines of reform. As the event came to a close, people filtered out into the hallway. Local kids clustered near a refreshment table. Parents chatted in low voices, and staffers passed around printed flyers with hotline numbers and QR codes. Outside the building, on a shaded bench, a young boy tugged on his grandmother's sleeve. He looked up at her with wide eyes. "Grandma," he asked, "are cops nice now?" She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes searched the skyline. the tops of the buildings catching the last orange light of day. Then she looked down at her grandson. "They're being held accountable," she said gently. "That's how we make sure they stay nice." The boy nodded, satisfied, even if he didn't fully understand. Because for children, justice isn't in policy, it's in safety. It's in seeing the people in charge acting like they care. And that was finally happening. In the weeks that followed the town hall, something subtle but powerful began to take shape around the city. It wasn't just in press releases or speeches. It was in how people treated each other. It was in the way officers started engaging in everyday spaces, not with intimidation, but with visible humility. At the local park, the same one where Tiana had once filmed her friend and ended up in handcuffs, a new city-monitored surveillance feed had been installed. Not as a tool of oppression, but of accountability. Footage was reviewed not just by internal affairs, but by the new civilian board. Officers knew this. They moved differently now. Their interactions were slower, gentler, more deliberate. One afternoon, a group of teenagers tossed a basketball on the edge of the sidewalk. When the ball bounced toward an approaching officer, he didn't scowl or bark a warning. He caught it mid-air, smiled, and tossed it back. The teens exchanged glances, surprised, unsure, but nodded politely. It was a small moment, but it mattered. In neighborhoods that had once lived under the weight of suspicion, people began to come forward, reporting concerns, yes, but also sharing positive experiences. The city's new complaint site included a compliment submission box, and slowly, those started to trickle in, too. Change didn't look like fireworks. It looked like consistency, like a mother walking her child home without clutching her purse, like a business owner waving to a patrol car and not flinching, like a teenager knowing that if something went wrong, someone would believe them. And in the middle of this cautious new rhythm was Tiana, who no longer felt like the girl in the viral video, frozen in humiliation. She was simply a citizen again, but one who had earned the quiet power of influence. Her daily life began to rebuild itself. She took walks again, this time with her phone in her pocket, not clutched defensively in her hand. She returned to school part-time, picking up her studies in sociology and urban planning, and every morning before leaving the house, she stopped at the garden her mother had tended for years. The roses were in full bloom now, thick petals, deep colors, strong stems that bent in the wind but didn't break. One morning she knelt beside the rose bush, watering each plant carefully. Her phone sat on the steps nearby, the screen still cracked from the day of the arrest. She hadn't replaced it, not yet. Not because she couldn't, but because it reminded her of what she'd survived and what she'd changed. Inside the house, a framed photograph sat on the hallway shelf. It was a simple selfie. Tiana and her mother, side by side, after a community meeting. They looked tired, but proud, determined, whole. The hum of the day was gentle now, no sirens, no shouting, just the sound of healing, slow but real. And in that hum, Tiana finally allowed herself something she hadn't felt in weeks: peace. Late one afternoon, as golden light poured through the windows of the Community Resource Center, a young teenage girl stepped nervously into the front lobby of the city's police department. She carried a notepad, a small handheld recorder, and an oversized press badge clipped to her collar that read, "City Youth Tribune." Tiana was already waiting. She recognized the girl instantly. Amira, a high school junior who'd been covering youth activism in the area for her school's media club. She had emailed Tiana weeks earlier, requesting an interview for a story called "What Justice Looks Like." Tiana stood from the bench in the lobby and greeted her with a warm smile. "You made it," she said. Amira nodded. "I've never been in here before," she admitted. "It's kind of intimidating." Tiana glanced around the freshly painted walls. The new bulletin board showing citizen resources, community liaisons, complaint procedures. It was the same building where she had once been violently arrested, but now it was different, and that difference mattered. "It used to be worse," Tiana said gently, "but places can change, people can change." She walked to the glass door leading to the interview room and held it open for Amira. A simple gesture, but one filled with meaning. Just like Malcolm had done in the final scene of that other story, the one that had inspired so much reform. Tiana had learned from that moment, carried its weight, and now she was passing it on. Inside the room, Amira clicked on her recorder. "First question," she said. "Why did you decide to come back, to stay involved after everything?" Tiana paused, then answered quietly, "Because justice isn't a moment, it's a legacy, and I want to be part of the reason someone else doesn't have to go through what I did." The interview went on, but outside, the world continued moving. Mothers walking with their kids, officers chatting with community members, roses blooming under street lamps. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever would be. But it was honest, it was trying. And that, in the end, was what hope looked like. If Tiana's courage moved you, hit like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to join the movement for justice in action. Together we can hold power accountable. Step on old social norms in the ways of the world's most changing leader. Aka, you've got this. In the book, hit like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to join the movement for justice in action.